My name is Correia. I'm a director, Global Information Risk and Security at Estée Lauder, specifically the Architecture, Engineering and Ops team. Our responsibilities within the team itself is to provide advisory consulting services and also audit support, operational support, engagement and project management support in terms of within the security realm. To lay some context into this, I'd like to talk about the malware types so that it gives you an idea of how we get about what has changed. There are typically around five, if you had to categorize, five basic types of malware. You have the known bad or reputational type of malware, which is like IP addresses, or URLs, which is like websites. You have files or file executables or JavaScript. That's known bad. And if it's known bad, you can tag them or create a hash, if you will, so that you create a signature and whereby you can compare it in the future. Okay? Then you have, going to the next malware type, you have stuff such as ever-changing malware, or what you call polymorphic. They keep changing. It's ever-changing because the attackers don't want you to create that signature, and so they, almost like a Trojan horse, they keep changing over. It could be over time or an event, and it keeps changing, so it makes it difficult. But these still can be somewhat create a signature, if you will, but it's sort of delayed. And these two types of malware is what traditional antivirus products handle. So what they would do is create the signatures provided to the agent at the endpoint, and the endpoint would protect from then on. But this is not scalable, because what happens in time is these, you have to keep trying to catch up, if you will. So as the signatures come down, you need to protect, and it goes on and on. And in today's world, there are hundreds of thousands of pieces of malware created per minute. So you can imagine this thing going on. It could be going in a loop, and it's always playing catch up, and it's still dangerous. Then you have the next kind of malware. The next kind of malware is fileless. So now there's no entity to create a signature, if you will. Everything's done in memory, and there's no evidence. But so it's you get into the machine, and everything's being changed. So it's fileless. Things such as what you hear, the terminology like ransomware, are typically these kind of fileless, where they keep no evidence, but they control you. The next type of evidence is what happens, like you and I and users and so on and so forth. We share files and Office documents, and those documents have macros. In other words, they have scripts that run that enable it to do certain functions. Those functions were actually meant to do good things. But now, attackers know how to use that in a bad way. So as we share stuff, there's bad macros, you run them, and this is that's another form of malware. And the last but not the least is attackers look for the weakest link in the environment, and it's a typical way. You go into the weakest link, and from there you go laterally into your network and start attacking. So those are the five kinds. Now, what next generation antivirus started doing, and then this is how the landscape had changed. They started, by the way, attackers use the same techniques, so you have to understand when you talk, you'll hear these terms like artificial intelligence, machine learning, and so on and so forth, and data sciences. The same thing is being done by attackers. They use the same tool sets, but they use it for attack, and antiviruses use it to protect, and so on and so forth. So the next generation antivirus products, they start using data sciences, they start using machine learning, as well as threat intelligence to determine patterns of behavior so that you can get to the tactics, techniques, and procedures used by attackers. Now, this is complex because it is done fast, but it's also using the machine to do things, and they are really lightweight and nimble. But as time goes on, they get better and better over time, okay? And these are how these next generation type of tools work. For that to happen and happen really well, what next generation tool sets, for the most part, they all don't necessarily follow, and I'll be getting to that, how they differentiate. They go through gates, if you will. So they still take the intelligence of the old school traditional stuff, because those are lessons learned. You take that intelligence from the signatures, if you have, and whenever it gets it, but then it goes through another gate by which it looks at the static analysis. And by the way, this is called static analysis, this first two, whether you talk about the reputational stuff that I spoke about or the known bad, and then you talk about stuff such as ever-changing. Those parts are static because they're real entities, and you can do analysis and look at various points within an executable or parts of an executable and say, listen, this is good behavior, and this is you can come to some certain conclusions that this is bad behavior based on heuristics and so on and so forth. Next generation also then passes through that gate and goes into behavioral part, where it hooks into the operating system, and from there it can look at behaviors of applications and one application or process talking to another, and then determine, or even talking outside of the endpoint, saying, hey, one endpoint talking to another endpoint, and it says, hey, this is good behavior, this we think is bad because, or it's going outside, it shows behavior of malware. It tries to go onto the internet, for example, or it's looking at this port, or this application is scraping the memory, which is not good behavior, or it's injecting code into another when it was meant to do certain things. So that's how next generation works. Now, it passes through that gate. They've taken it a step further, and this is an evolving world. So it's going on and on. This research is still going on, and every time we go past, you'll see there are new things happening. What they've done, because they're hooked into the operating system for the most part, not everybody does that, is they can do other things. They can say, hey, I can do file integrity to check. This is needed for compliance purposes, by the way. You use other products in many cases to say, has these files changed? Who changed these files? And so on. That's called file integrity. In other words, you want to make sure that file is the way it's supposed to be. And if it changed, who changed it and when and why. So you can give audit evidence for compliance needs. Then you can do other things like say, is data exfiltrating this endpoint? That's data leakage, if you will. And it does stuff like that. And they've gone even further. You've heard of the term IoTs, which is, cameras and so on. They all have little chips. They communicate over Bluetooth and all our Bluetooth devices. What these endpoints now can do is determine protocols and find out who, if anything is talking to this endpoint that has the agent. The Bluetooth doesn't have to have an agent, or this other endpoints don't have. As long as it's communicating, it can notify this endpoint, hey, this is what's happening in the vicinity in your area. And now we can say, hey, should we block or should we do something about this? Or it seems to be trying to do certain things. Are you okay with it? So it can enable some blocking straight off at the endpoint. And so that's how the evolving has happened. To answer another question that you sort of alluded to is, how are they different? Some products, next generation products, stop at the static analysis and say, hey, we can stop here by not going further, because based on our experiences, you can catch a whole lot with that static part of things. But that also, when you say that and you don't go through the behavior, the full behavior thing of actually in action, you tend to lose out, and you might end up creating a lot of false positives. So you might think it's malware, but even good stuff behaves sometimes in a bad way if it's badly written code or other things. So those are what some people call next generation. There are other next generation products that add features for free. And some vendors, if you need to get this feature of remediating, because a lot of this next generation products have expanded, so they can remediate. So if something hit you in a bad way, you can actually remediate just that area that was bad and take it out, or you can roll back to a point in time which was good, and so on. Products either give you as part of the whole product, it includes that, and others say, oh, you need to buy another product. Okay, and then they can tell you what is a term you may or may not hear, but it's often used in our industry, patient zero. Sometimes when you have malware that has come into the environment, you don't know who was the first person that started this. So where was the entry point? A lot of these products can tell you where the patient zero is and tell you the storyline. Because of the fact that it's doing this pattern recognition and so on and so forth, it can tell you where the start was, where it started, and how it kind of spread. And this is the evidence, because look, sometimes you block certain things. Somebody might say, hey, I always had this. But really, it's bad stuff, and we're going to tell you the story behind it. Other times, for forensics reasons, you've had some bad stuff. You need to get forensics information out. In other words, get information from that piece of device. You can pull that out because now this is hooked into the operating system and can pick up, and so on and so forth. So that, in a nutshell, if I could, would be the differentiators. Now, so the way we did this, actually, in a nutshell, is we did our own research, but we had to have a starting point. So we used some of the well-known resources in the industry, research such as the NSS Labs, Gartner, IDC, and we used information from there. We garnered information from there. We started putting scores towards that. But you take it with a pinch of salt. Oh, we interviewed the vendors that we thought were among the top in the area, the 4 or 5 next generation, and we interviewed them, tried to figure out how much of those products are really just because somebody's report says it's good. Is it compatible in our environment? We have all kinds of endpoints. We have all kinds of other products. We need to make sure that they work together without stepping on each other. And those are important key points. The other thing is we looked at vendor roadmaps, and do we have to then look at that product or look at another competing product, and so on. And then we also interviewed, we researched stuff on legal issues with companies behind the scenes. We looked at internal forums, we looked at researchers and the dark web and the big white hats in the industry, because our industry is small and we all communicate with each other to see what was their concepts and how these things are going. And we picked up 4 vendors. And then we had our other drivers. We said, okay, we have cost issues. What kind of efficiency would it bring into our environment? Where is it ease of use? What are the operational stuff? What kind of consoles? Our other requirements was to have, because we're global and we're around the world, in some cases we need to have a console in the cloud, and actually that was our goal. And also regionalize different regions work differently and let them manage their own areas. But areas like such as China and perhaps Russia, where we probably cannot export logs, we wanted to have something on premise, if you will, and where they all start talking to each other and you have this one global view of things. Those were the other requirements, okay? So that's where we covered, and we did a full analysis. And for the actual, that was the paper kind of stuff. For the real analysis, we broke up into a lab environment where we took real live malware. We had to be careful because we started testing this against the types of endpoints that we have versus the other and then we took another section where we introduced it into our production in a subset of our environment to see how it actually interacts, whether are they really compatible? So we're validating what we think. How do we deploy it? Does it work with our change control, our processes in place? How does it affect, and so on? And these were the things that we tested against, and then we came up with our conclusions, and we selected one, which worked really well thus far. Nothing's perfect, and there's never going to be a perfect answer, but that's where we are. It's a continuous evolving environment. I don't think we'll ever get to this utopian perfection, but the way I visualize this is we have to be good at crisis management. So in other words, as long as we isolate it and we can manage, there's always going to be break-ins at some place. We need to manage that crisis. As long as we're prepared for that, we can get to where we want to be. That's in a nutshell. There's so many other aspects of the social engineering aspects and so on, but that I think crisis management is a big thing.